worked with businesses in over 100 industries. I met Gary, John Carlton, Dan Kennedy, Ted Nicholas, Carl Galletti. David Deutsch was the other one. We become friends and done a lot of stuff together.
Wow. How was that being around the greatest copywriters in the world back then when you said it was just 2 or 3 years into your career learning copy?
I didn't really know. Copywriting, no one knew what we were. We were considered the black sheep. We were the ones they didn't want to talk about because we did junk mail, and then we did infomercials and direct response advertising. The bad stuff says sleaze, scum, hype, but the good stuff, you don't even notice it. It's just someone giving you good information.
What do you think the number one gap is that most copywriters have, even the good ones?
The big gap is that they think of themselves as copywriters rather than writers who are trying to effect a certain outcome. They believe human nature is a change. Their doesn't stink anymore. They've evolved and they're better than their parents or the grandparents. So they don't need features and benefit. I mean, the prefrontal cortex, that may have evolved, but the part that fears danger, that wants more, that cares about their family, all of those core basic things that have driven human nature for tens of thousands of years, they're still there.
So it's kind of an interesting industry right now. What are your thoughts on where things are going with this and the kind of copywriters today?
We were talking about this, and you must hear this too. People at the highest level say, I can't find a good copywriter. When it comes time to actually perform and get the job done and write the copy that closes the sales, they can't do it. And at the end of the day, that's the sexy part, right? The sexy part is being able to get to the end of the week without worrying about 10 bills you're going to have to pay.
So here I am today with David Garfinkrel. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
For those of you who don't know David, you are I would say you're the world's best copy coach, and you've published, and you're a best-selling author with 3 copywriting books, and you've worked with some of the best in the industry, and you've worked with Agora, and you've coached, a lot of the best today. So thanks so much for doing this, and I have a lot of questions about copy coaching and also about, what copywriters need to do to get to that next level. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's do it. So I think the first thing I'd love to know from you is, in all of your experience coaching, and now that you've written these books as well, and you've worked with all these big companies, what do you think the number one gap is that most copywriters have, even the good ones?
I think the big gap is that they think of themselves as copywriters rather than writers who are trying to effect a certain outcome. And they use this mechanism called copywriting to do it. And sometimes copywriting needs to look like ordinary writing. I've found that the very best copywriters, when you read what they write, Jay Peterman's like the ultimate outlier example. If you're familiar with him, they actually had him or a version of him on Seinfeld. He writes these long...
Yeah, I was thinking of Seinfeld. Yeah.
Yeah. These long wandering expositive stories about something in order to sell a product. And the writing's very good, and it's taut, snappy. And I think particularly of Paris Lampropoulos, who is not as much out in the public, but, is a friend of mine, and we've spent a little time together. He's been on my podcast, as I hope you will be. We can talk about that later. And
be great.
Yeah. And his copy doesn't look like copy at all. It looks like clear writing. And, I know he mentors people and he keeps the way he does it very secret, as I do with a portion of mine, but I can talk about a lot of the other parts. And, he focuses not on headlines or big ideas or strategic thinking. He focuses on clean, spare prose, just writing in a way that is super easy to read, like, the magazines during the golden age of magazines, your Esquire, and I'm sure they had some in your country. I don't know those, but there were these magazines people would aspire to because the writing, it was just crystalline. It was so clean. that's ultimately, see, the way I look at copy fits what I'm talking about here. I think copy is a conversation. It's conversational English. It's a two-way conversation, and the copywriter has to carry both sides of it. And it's in written form most of the time. So, and surely you've read copy sometimes where you feel like the person is talking to you. I know the first time I read Gary Halbert's newsletter, I felt that, and I was just like, I'd never seen anything like that before. So I read it over and over again. I couldn't figure out what he was doing, and that frustration and curiosity, sucked me into this world. Plus the fact that I needed a better way to make a living than I was doing at the time. So I think that's it. I almost call it uncopywriting. It's like, I remember I had to give a presentation, and it was a very crucial presentation. And this acting coach gave me some advice, which I didn't really understand at the time, but I do now. She said, memorize to unmemorize. In other words, memorize it so much that it doesn't seem memorized when you deliver it. And copy, I think you need to have it so deeply ingrained in you, not the copy itself, but what I call copywriting reflexes, the muscle memory, the familiarity, the aggregated experiences, all of those things just need to be part of you enough so that you can just write simply and plainly. And, you look at some of the best performing pieces. I mean, the most famous one in the world, not just among copywriters, is The Insult That Made a Man Out of Mac, right? The Charles Atlas comic book one-page ad. Or you look at the Wall Street Journal letter, which reportedly brought in $2 billion, more than any other tracked ad. Or you look at Joe Carbo's ads, if you've ever seen those, for the Lazy Man's Way to Riches. They don't read like copy. They read like Reader's Digest. They read real simple. And I have this saying, the answer is always simple. Getting there is never simple. And I've started to deconstruct what I meant by that, because it was all from my intuition, and it sounds really clever. It doesn't mean a damn thing. I realized you get to the right simple answer by maybe discarding 97, 98, 99 other answers. So it's the journey to getting there, and all of the decisions you made along the way, they're as important as the answer itself.
I think that's a big part of what we do as writers, right? Because we spend all this time writing and removing stuff, and you never actually see that in the final version. How many times I've written a sales letter that has so many things I previously had in it, all these other ideas, and you strip those ideas. And I think newer writers are sometimes uncomfortable with, let's say, I wrote an email that's 500 words. I don't feel comfortable charging $200 for it. It's like, well, what about the 1,000 words or other ideas that you didn't use? The client never sees that part of the process. They never see all the stuff that you didn't add, which is why it's only 500 words. So sometimes it's from that perspective as well. Yeah, I like that. And I actually see that a lot with newer writers. I see it as well with more experienced writers, but with the beginner writers, everything sounds like sales copy. It sounds like you're about to, but wait, there's more. And there's all these sort of techniques that are they're so obviously sales techniques. I found that when I was writing to my list, because I'm a copy coach, copywriters are going to be aware of copywriting. So I kind of stumbled into that myself, this trying to not speak like copy, because I was always writing to my list saying, I can't write these overly obvious tactics in my emails, because people will read it and think to themselves like, oh, he's just using copy on me. So I had to remove myself from all the tactics and just write to them as a person, and drop all the tactics in my writing on purpose so that it doesn't feel like I'm just using copy. And then I started to really find myself improving as a writer when I started to not, write as it's copy. And I think that also comes into AI these days. I think that's why many copywriters they're going to find themselves struggling if they use AI, because AI just takes those general copywriting, copy sounding things and just adds it to the writing. But it's like, that's not necessarily what people are going to buy as they get more skeptical, as they see more and more copy. Now if you see a certain type of headline, it's copy. It already turns the reader off to the oh, he's going to sell me something. Oh, it's a webinar. Oh, another webinar where they're going to pitch me something, So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. You think about it, we have all of these negative terms for salespeople, right? We call them used car salesmen or insurance salesmen or whatever. But the fact is, you've probably bought a car. You might have even bought a used car. And it might have been from someone who you said, well, he wasn't really a salesman because he helped me, figure out what I want. I felt comfortable. Well, it's not the difference between being a salesman and not being a salesman. It's the difference between being skilled or not being skilled. And the same thing applies to copy. You get a lot of people who are very on the nose and superficial and trying to essentially show off or repeat or regurgitate what they've seen, as opposed to, I think good copy, it operates from a principle. It operates from a context and from a zeitgeist. You need to understand what you're trying to do, who you're talking to, how they're feeling, and you write to those things, as opposed to most people are just writing features and benefits about a product without any regard to who they're writing to or how it's going to be received.
I find a lot of copywriters these days, they're not even focused on features and benefits. Like when I got introduced to the industry, that was the first thing I learned, was the difference between a feature and a benefit. Nowadays, I find a lot of copywriters are focusing on value, like, write value emails, write value posts, write value this. And it's more content than it is copy. They're not even focusing on like presenting the offer. They're focusing more on just showing a story or giving a listicle, but then the story is kind of fragmented. It's more of a chronology than it is a story. And, the listicle is not really a listicle. It's more just a piece of content with stuff that the market's already aware of. It's not really moving people down the sales process. So I found these days, David, that many copywriters are not getting the coaching that I had when I was introduced to the industry. Like, because I think there's just less people that I'm seeing that are like actually teaching the fundamentals of copy from a principle level. There's a lot of newer guys that have come into the industry that teach the templates and formulas and tactics, and it's all diluted from previous experts that had the fundamentals, So I think that's a big issue I've been struggling with also as a coach, because, how do you bridge that gap? Because they're not coming to me with the deeper understanding of the difference between benefits and features. They're not coming to me with the difference between like a dimensionalized benefit versus a functional benefit. Like just simple concepts like that, you have to introduce to them. They're not even familiar with how to write a bullet. One coach that I'm aware of doesn't really even teach bullets, because they're like, oh, we don't really use bullets in our own copies. We don't really focus on bullets. I was like, well, okay. So, I would say that bullets are the core skill that I developed, and I feel like that's my core skill as a copywriter, is I can build bullets, So it's kind of an interesting industry right now. What are your thoughts on where things are going with this and the kind of copywriters today?
Let me go back to the beginning of what you were talking about, because I think the whole value thing is a solution to a problem that suddenly took a life of its own. The problem was people were, kind of cluelessly and tone deafly writing social media posts that were just hard charging sales pitches. And so somebody said, no, you've got to include some value in them. It's not exactly a new idea. Gary Bencivenga called it the Cracker Jack secret, right? People open up your sales letter and there's a little surprise inside, some kind of value. But then, the way things start is not necessarily, they don't always grow in the the same direction of the intention they started with. And so I think that's what's going on. I think a lot of people, and I know I went through this phase when I was a lot younger too, they believe human nature is changed. Their shit doesn't stink anymore. They've evolved and they're better than their parents or the grandparents or whatever. And so they don't need features and benefits. All they need to do is see this wonderful thing I'm telling them about, and they're going to buy it. And then when it doesn't happen, I don't know what other rationalization they go off onto. But, I think Claude Hopkins said it. I'm not sure who said it first. Human nature doesn't change. The human nature that we're concerned with. I mean, the prefrontal cortex, the part that uses AI, the part that, can use an iPhone, and no one in 1950 could use an iPhone right away, that may have evolved, but the part that seeks security, that fears danger, that wants more, that cares about their family, all of those core basic things that have driven human nature for tens of thousands of years, they're still there. They haven't changed because the human physiology has not evolved that much, and certainly the brainstem and other parts of the unconscious mind have not changed. And so people confuse new ideas and their belief in their politics or their spirituality or their social vision with reality. And when you do that, your copy is not going to work too well for any length of time.
That's interesting because a lot of copywriters these days will say, legacy copy, the old controls, that stuff is no longer relevant because, attention span's gone down or something or other. So what do you think is the right perspective to put on, the content or the copy that was written that wasn't for social media, but now it's still useful and you can still draw from it to actually, I think, get an advantage now in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah. That's the part of my coaching I keep really private, but
that's the secret part. Okay.
It is a big part of it. But what's secret is the specific methodology. I think you can learn a lot because the structure is buried. It's hidden in copy, and people have analyzed it, but learning to analyze it yourself, learning to see it, learning to understand what's going on in a headline like "The Lazy Man's Way to Riches." I mean, there's so much in there, people don't want to work. They'd rather be lazy. People want to be rich. They want to believe that they don't work, they can still be rich. I mean, it's just like the surface level. So being able to analyze it. And so one thing I do is I have my mentoring clients go through dozens, maybe hundreds of ads and they're looking for very specific things so that they train themselves to see those specific things in the copy they're writing, in the copy they're reviewing, in the copy they're updating. But there are changes. A lot of the stuff that Gary Halbert and Gene Schwartz and Ted Nicholas, people I admire, I worship, I learn from. You couldn't do it today. It wouldn't be compliant, and so there'd be regulatory problems. And so the things they said would be, they're just not up with the social norms, and some people would be really offended, and some people might even try and have it torn down, So there are superficial things that have changed, and there are levels of hype that are no longer permissible, or you're really stepping way out on a limb if you try it, but the basic format of, capturing someone's attention, breaking their state, with a pattern interrupt, getting them curious about a danger or an opportunity, and then walk them through a series of steps to getting them to take an action that they would feel is better. They'd be better off taking that action than not taking it or thinking about it. That hasn't changed. That's the same as it always was. Probably always will be that way.
I'd love to know more about what you said when you said, the structure of copy is hidden. Like, are we talking about a idea, like the ideas behind it, or is there much more depth to structure from your perspective?
Yeah. So at a surface level, the structure is function. Is this like the intro? Is this like the offer? Is this like the guarantee? Is this like the recap? Call to action? Is this like the PS? That's at the surface. The deeper structure has to do with the emotional path, emotional journey, if you want, that you're taking the client on. How are they responding? How are they feeling as they're reading this and taking it in? And also, how are you guarding against pushing up their resistance so high and having it, stay there permanently like a wall? How are you guarding against doing that? That's all in the structure too. You might call that strategy, or you might call that craft, but that's something you kind of get the sense of from writing a lot and reading a lot, and for you and me also as coaches working with other people, and you get that little tick 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 going off in your gut that says, "Nuh-uh, no, there's going to be a problem here," or "Yes, that's exactly how to do it." And sometimes explaining it is harder than seeing it and fixing it.
Are there certain ways that you can improve the emotional journey aspect of writing copy? Because for me, I can show people the structure on the surface level, and I can say, hey, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. The emotional aspect of it, for me, I learned a lot of it just through being immersed and through osmosis of working with clients. It became like an internal sort of, I'm still obviously working on it, so I'd love to learn how to improve at it. But I would just sort of internalized a lot of these patterns that the best were using to take somebody on an emotional journey. And for me, it clicked. But I always find it's quite difficult to engineer that click in somebody that you're coaching, a copywriter that you're coaching. How do you get them to stop seeing just the words, not just the ideas, but also feel that journey, and also can that golden gut, being able to say like, okay, this part of the process, this is disrupting the emotional flow. Like, you're saying this thing here, this is going to raise objections. This is not really the direction that you have this nice, and this nice emotional progression. And then you get to this section, and now I feel like you've broken that flow. Like, I can tell that, but how do we get to teach that to a copywriter?
Good question. I think it's individual. I think every person is going to have their own blind spot or gap. So one of my agreements or promises for my clients is I won't share anything about them or their business that would identify them. But I think it's in the spirit of okay that I can share this. So I had one client, brilliant guy. I mean, like off the charts IQ, who acknowledged to me that he was on the spectrum. He had Asperger's, and he was really having trouble understanding people's feelings. And he said, I would go to parties, and I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know why people behaved the way they did. And I said, I understand. And, he needed to improve this skill for his copy. And so I developed a system for him. I said, you like to watch movies? And does your wife like to watch movies? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I want you to watch a movie where there's, where things come to a head, or where things come to a resolution of a very tense, where there's some kind of shift emotionally. And I want you to follow each character up to that, for a couple minutes and look at the several steps they go through. What were they feeling? What did they want? And what were they thinking? And what did they say? And I just want you to map those things out. And that really worked for him because it was a very analytical, repeatable approach. I have no idea how I came up with it. I've never suggested it to anyone else. I had another guy, very successful, scary, successful, especially for his age, still working with him. And he had been doing a lot of financial copy. And he got some health copy, that, some alternative health supplements type of copy, a client to work on.
Oh, that's different than finance.
It is. Yeah. It is. And he didn't have any emotional perception problems. He didn't have any neurological issues. He wasn't neurodivergent, but he was young and he was male, young, dumb, and very male, right? Wasn't dumb, but a lot of testosterone. So he showed me his first letter to, and it was definitely, I think it was explicitly for a women's health supplement, and he was, writing in the voice of the company president, said, "Hi, I'm the CEO of," and I said, no, that's how you talk to guys. Guys love to show their badges off to each other, right? Women, and so, he wasn't offended. He didn't fall apart. He said, "Oh, okay." And I said, so I remembered a book that, what was her name? Deborah something. She's like a professor at Georgetown Georgetown in D.C. And the book was called You Just Don't Understand. And it was about male and female styles of communication. And I had him go through the book and do some exercises. And he got it. He figured it out. He just didn't know. And no one had told him. And you know what? No one told me either. I heard about that book, but I just sort of learned these things over the years, I went to a graduate program in coaching called evidence-based coaching in Santa Barbara, California. And we had these long sessions where we would sit and just listen or talk to people, and everyone would be looking at us, almost like doctors looking at a patient in surgery. A lot of the people I talked to were women. And I think by that point, my communication style is good. But I had training in that kind of stuff. I had people who taught me NLP, and one guy who is, the seduction king of Marin County, who needed something from me, so he offered to give me coaching in exchange for copywriting. And I learned a lot about not just talking to him and not just seduction, but a lot about communication in general from him. But I guess to answer your question, how do you help? To me, it's, you have to get to know the client the same way you would know a prospect, the coaching client. And you have to, it's almost like you're looking for chinks in the wall. You're looking for little holes you could open things up, because it's not that they're resistant. It's like everyone comes in, with a fixed view of the world. Now, people do open themselves up somewhat at some level for coaching, but for something having to do with the emotional journey, that's usually a little trickier to crack. And so you might have to use some creative techniques. The other thing is it just comes from experience, and the
I was about to say, yeah.
Right. So if you've done live sales, either on the phone or in person or by Zoom or whatever, and you are a perceptive person, you'll notice after a certain period of time, you get to the point where you'll see a script and you can predict where people are going to bring up objections, right? If you're doing it with copy, it's a little more difficult. I still watch a lot of movies and a lot of TV. Maybe it's just because I'm lazy. I like to watch TV a lot, but I think I learn a lot from, because people, everyone's the same emotionally, but people's personalities are different, and the routes by which their emotions travel are different, and it's good to learn about different kinds of people.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to hear all these different ways that you've pulled stuff from other industries, and everything's actually all just connected. It's all communication at the end of the day. It's all connected. I really like that, and I think it makes sense to me, because when I tell people, for example, how do you shift a belief in a piece of copy? Let's say like an email. Have you ever watched Inception? It might be something I'll ask somebody. Go watch Inception to get an idea of what that process is like. You don't have to go and read a book on like a specific copywriting book. The copywriting books are there for a purpose, but there's so much stuff you can pull from anywhere. And the biggest thing I say to a lot of the young guys, because obviously I find that majority of the people I'm coaching are quite young men that want to learn copywriting. That's a majority of the people that come to me. A lot of them, I tell them when they want to get better at empathy or compassion in their copy, because I would usually say that that's sort of the starting point for them. I say, part of the reason that you're struggling to talk to women in their 40s is because you're an 18-year-old and you still live at home and you haven't even had a relationship before. So, your context is very small. For me, it became very easy to write business copy, B2B. When I had a coaching business, I got better at it because I understood the problems that coaches deal with. When I was writing copy for business opportunity, it was a lot easier for me to write it than health copy because I had bought business opportunity programs to get into copywriting. So I already knew the prospect. I was a lot of the time projecting my own experiences and my own life into the person that I was writing to, especially when it correlated, So I think that that's also a big part of it for a lot of the young guys. I think if you're spending time writing copy and you're struggling to empathize and go to that deeper level, maybe it's because you're still living at home and you've never had to pay rent before. So talking to somebody in their 30s that's struggling with bills, telling them, do you ever struggle to pay a mortgage or you ever struggle to pay rent? You don't really know what that experience is like. It's you never really felt that before. So this is why I think it's really dangerous to be a lone wolf in the industry today, because especially if you're a young guy, it's like you really want to be around the right people.
It is. You're so right. I do have one guy in his 20s, and he's actually very independent. He's worked for Agora before, and I'm not sure if he's married. I think, or he lives with his girlfriend outside the U.S. He's American, so he's pretty independent. But I mean, I have a client who's 68 years old. Now he's a business owner, not a pro copywriter, and he wants to write copy for his business. And his business has gone up. He's told me he's so thrilled over. He's at 67%, and we've been working together for about 5 months. So, yeah, this can work for someone of any age. But for younger people, I mean, yes, just talk to people and just go to not just people at conferences. I mean, I really got my own career started a lot by going to a lot of conferences, and then when I had an opportunity, speaking at them, and then I came up with a product, templates, which I think are great and maybe the first and maybe the best ever, but a little outdated. But nevertheless, they're still helpful to some people, maybe not at the highest level of competition anymore. But just talk to people, and learn to freaking shut up and listen and hear what they have to say, and, hear things that you don't want to hear, that you don't hear things that you don't hear them say things that you don't believe yourself. Sometimes, as a copywriter, you're going to be writing for a market that believes something different than you do. Now, you want to get to the point where you're not working with people you really find morally offensive or aesthetically disgusting, but nevertheless, you're going to find that sometimes the market has different beliefs than you do. In fact, it usually always does, to some degree, and you've got to learn to get out of your own way, to I'm not talking to you, of course, Matthew, you know this, but,
Well, I could improve too, but yeah, I get what you're
so
saying.
could,
Yeah.
and so could I, but, a lot of people will make these flat statements like everybody knows and everybody thinks, and that's not true. There are some very common things about all humans, but there are some stark differences at different people in different situations, different genders. Men and women look at things differently sometimes, communicate differently. Women communicate a lot more than men, and they're a lot subtler and sometimes indirect. And you could make the case that they're wiser than we are, but we're men, so we're going to do what we're going to do, man. We're men.
This is interesting. The more we chat about this, the more I'm thinking that to be a great copywriter requires more listening and more consuming than it does actually writing. And I think that's very counterintuitive for many newer writers, because they're coming into this industry thinking, I'm going to say stuff. I'm going to present my ideas. I'm going to say what I want to say. I'm going to bring in all this stuff, right? I'm going to say this and that and the other. And yeah, the more I think about my own career as a writer, and the stuff that I wrote that was the best stuff actually came from listening to people more than it did from writing. Like, as a copywriting coach, I find that I can talk to copywriters very well because I've had over 1,000 one-to-one calls. So I just know what they're thinking about because I've listened to them for so many hundreds and hundreds of hours. That's why I can talk to them and they're like, oh, you get it. It's like, I've had a few people tell me, even coaching clients, they'll say, oh, it's like, I was about to ask that and you're already talking about what I was thinking about. It's like, yeah, well, it's because I've heard that before from a few people. I've already heard that that's the challenge that you're experiencing. And I can even describe it to you the way you're thinking and haven't said it before out loud because, this industry, there's a lot of things in common. On the other hand, how do I speak to somebody, a single mom in her 30s that wants to make money online? I'd have to start consuming a lot of content and
or actually meet one and talk to her.
Maybe meet them. Yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah. So actually it's funny because I got into copywriting because I was learning languages. That's actually how I got into the industry, is I was learning foreign languages. It was a passion as a teenager. It was like a hobby. And when I was learning languages, I was just consuming a lot of native material and engaging with native speakers, not studying theory so much, because a lot of theory on language learning is more theoretical. It's not really how native speakers actually speak the language. And through that consumption process and listening, I started to internalize this stuff to the point where I wasn't consciously trying to do it. It was just, I just know that that's how it sounds. And so when I learned copywriting, I kind of approached it from the same place at the beginning. I said, okay, so this is the language of money. This is the language of psychology. Let me just consume it and not try and... I didn't read many copywriting books. I didn't really watch many courses. I would just look at a lot of the best email lists. I used to read a lot of Matt Fury's emails. I love Matt Fury. He's the best, right? I consumed many of his programs as well. Even just listening to him speak, I internalized his thinking process. Listening to a lot of the business coaches back in 2018 that were quite big at the time in business opportunity, hearing them present ideas and shift beliefs and present stuff, just sort of internalized. And I think that gave me that kind of gave me my foundation before. And I didn't read Breakthrough Advertising or any of those books back then. So when I started to read books later, I was like, oh, this is the name for that thing I'm noticing. This is the name for that pattern. Now suddenly, I think many copywriters, they start the other way around, where they have a definition. They're like, I must come up with a big idea, but there's the big idea. They've got their own impression of what they think a big idea is, but they've never seen enough context of what the big idea is to the point where they actually, it's reversed, you know? So in my coaching, I've often done the opposite because of that, because I say, okay, well, don't worry about the name so much. Understand the what's going on here, consume the content to the point where you get it without having a name for it. Then if I give you a name for it, now it's like, you know what that actually means, not just, because people use like word like mechanism, for example. When people use the word mechanism, it's kind of like thrown around as the solution to anything. It's like, just like, here, use a mechanism here. It's like, well, in business opportunity, I don't always use a mechanism. I actually would rather say it's the opportunity that you're presenting. You're not presenting a mechanism. You have to understand fundamentally behind that, what is the mechanism? It's shifting some belief or perspective. But business opportunity, you don't have to present a mechanism because there's no ingredients for a business. It's an opportunity. So anyway, this has been my experience in the last few years that I've been coaching. It's a lot more about context and consuming,
Yeah. People want a magic pill, and so the magic pill of the moment, maybe mechanism, or, maybe value. And the fact is that, it's a lot of interrelated working parts, and they work, and you need to understand how the whole thing works and how each part fits in. I think it's really interesting the way you learn copy. I think it's probably the best way, because it's not about the components. It's about the experience of the prospect reading or hearing something and how they're going to respond to it. I don't work with beginners. I salute you for being able to do that. It's not just a lack of patience. It's a cluelessness. I don't know what to do to help people get started. I'm good at helping someone, a few years in, making six figures, low, mid six figures. And then usually at that point, they're competent. They know the basics. They've gotten some wins. They're not hitting as consistently as they'd like. They've got a little bit of a glass ceiling with their income, even if it's 150, 200K, and or more. Sometimes, amazingly, there are copywriters doing that. But, what I find is once, and I had this one guy, he was head of copy for a very large e-commerce brand, like a 9, maybe 10-figure. They just got acquired by someone. They're that big. And he said, I'm doing it. I'm getting results, but I don't really understand the foundation. So I kind of don't know how to look at it. And, part of what I do, and again, this is the proprietary part, is I have people go through a very structured learning process, which has a lot of aspects to it. It doesn't take that long, but it really gives people a sense of how the world works from a copywriting point of view, and what each section, each component does, and what they look like, and what they look like when they're working, and what they look like when they're not working. Because I think that's important, and maybe it's not the first thing you should learn. I mean, I learned kind of like the way you did. Now that I never thought of it before, but I was reading Gary Halbert's newsletters, which are hardly textbooks, right? And I was taking every gig I could get, and I was going to every seminar I could, but I was just writing. I'd, worked with over businesses in over 100 industries before I really started to taper off and do more coaching. And
it's a lot of industries.
Pardon?
That's a lot of industries.
Oh, 100. Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah.
It was. But, I wouldn't say no to anything in the beginning. And, I got steamrolled more than once, and I figure, you got to pay your dues somehow. Okay, well, that's how I paid mine. But yeah, I mean, what I try to do is get people to simulate experience as much as possible in part of the training I do. The other thing is just walking through copy with somebody, and like we're on Riverside right now. I always record my sessions either on a phone bridge for the people who'll do the phone calls, or Zoom for the people who insist on doing it that way. I don't know if they go over things, but I hope they do, because I'll explain a lot of stuff. As you can see, drop of the hat, I start talking. So,
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I think the whole experiential part of it, and the reflection, reflection on the reflection on the experience is really important.
I think you'd be really curious. That seems to be something a lot of the best copywriters have that I've worked with. They're curious. They're interested in what other people have to say.
Yeah. I mean, that even, zooms out to fixed mindset versus growth mindset. If you're familiar with Carol Dweck's great book, Mindset.
I think I've heard like 10 gurus probably steal that from him at this point. So I've definitely heard it, but I didn't know it was from him.
No, it's a her, yeah. Carol Dweck. It's a her.
Okay. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
And I think curiosity should not only be a natural trait, but it should be something that you actively develop, and there are a couple of social barriers that can, kind of push against you developing it. One is people who are curious ask a lot of questions. And I feel as long as you listen to the answers thoughtfully, that's okay. But some people will find it very annoying, even intrusive. The other thing, and this is a real deep psychological issue, some people are insecure in a way, and look, we're all insecure, everyone, every single person, but they're insecure in such a way that they feel if they ask too many questions, it looks like they don't know anything, and people will think they're ignorant or stupid or incompetent or unqualified. I'm not that kind of psychotherapist. I'm not a psychotherapist. So I don't know what to do about that. But yeah, the best copywriters are very curious and are very good at asking questions and eliciting information, and very good at research too.
One of the copy coaches I worked with in the early days taught me that about asking questions, because of the fact that there's insecurity and you look stupid, and what if people think this and that of you? And I was like that because when I first got started, I worked with a company that was like a bit of one of the biggest companies I first closed. They were a bit of a guru type. They had a persona, they were carrying online. Everybody was super successful. Everybody was wearing a suit. I didn't really wear suits much, So I came into this environment where I thought I have to act like, those sales guys, Wolf of Wall Street sort of behavior. I got to act like tough and I got to act successful. And so I was starting to act like that. And I didn't want to ask questions because I thought it would disrupt the culture of everybody just being a high performer and like, here's the instructions and you go crush it and deliver. So I had that impression, okay, I must behave like that. And so I stopped asking questions with that client. People would say, oh, we need this email sequence. We need this from you. No problem. I got it. I'll go and do the sequence. And I stopped asking questions. And then my copy didn't perform because I was just stressing, pulling my hair out, trying to figure out what they actually wanted, because they didn't actually give me all the clarity. But I didn't know back then that, obviously the client doesn't know everything and you have to actually extract it from them sometimes. And they don't always know what you need. So anyway, one of my copy coaches, he said to me, Matt, if you were a general and you were instructing some soldiers, and you were about to go into battle with your squad of soldiers, and they didn't tell you the plan, they didn't tell you the strategy, would you just go into battle without context, without knowing, and risk those men's lives? Or would you rather be stupid for 5 minutes in front of the superior to get clarity on the strategy because you're protecting lives? And I'm like, yeah, I would, my ego doesn't matter because I'm protecting these men. And he's like, so it's the same here. You got all this money on the line. This business needs you to work here. It doesn't matter if you look stupid because there's something more important here, and you probably won't look stupid anyway because the right person will see where it's coming from anyway. It's not really about being stupid. And so I start asking questions, and I stopped being afraid of asking questions. It really helped me a lot. So I think a lot of the young people watching this, especially younger people, when you come into this industry, you might think everybody's this high performing genius that's got all this stuff figured out. I don't, in my experience, I think we all have so many gaps that we all still figuring out. And if you just drop that frame and just be very curious and ask people questions, you'll find a lot of the answers. You did say something that I wanted to ask you about. You said intrusive. That some people feel it's intrusive. What did you mean by that?
Well, some people feel very private about their lives or their internal state, and sometimes when you ask a question, they'll go, I don't want to go there, or,
Oh, okay.
And, if this could be a bit of a problem if the person who says that is the product you're promoting, if you're promoting them, their services. But you just have to work around it. Sometimes they just don't want to answer that question until they know that they'll be handled considerately and acceptingly, that you're not going to judge them and run roughshod over them and say, oh, are you kidding me? Right. It's like sometimes people need to test you out a little bit on a few back and forths in the course of a conversation before they're willing to open up. I mean, I found that patience is a real virtue, and also not getting flustered, when the person says, because if you've got to get that piece of information, they say, I don't want to go there. If you go, okay, but let me ask you this, and maybe you can circle around back to it later.
Get back later, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, some of this is gambits and gamesmanship, brinksmanship, I guess, but very little, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward.
It's so interesting. So much more listening and so much less speaking for the, it's like, there's a lot of editing, when it comes to copy. What are your thoughts on the difference between the first draft and actually editing it? I know a lot of people say, oh, you should write drunk and edit sober. And then other people will say, edit the structure, like design your structure for, let's say, a sales letter or an email, build that first, and then flesh it out, and then come back and do it again. There's like different processes.
Yeah. So in the world of fiction, they have a saying that there are two types of writers. And they're talking about fiction writers, of course. They say one type is a planner and the other type is a pantser. Now, before you let your imagination run wild on what a pantser is, a planner is someone who structures it out with an outline. A pantser does it by the seat of their pants. And so that's right drunk, right? That's right by the seat of your pants. I think everyone has to find their own style. What I've found works for me is the most bizarre combination. I plan everything to a T, and then I don't literally throw the outline away, but I often write without looking at it. It just comes pouring out of me differently. And some of it may not even resemble the outline that I wrote, but I think the key thing is I know from experience that a lot of decisions will have to be made in the course of writing this. And if I can make those decisions before I actually start writing, that works a lot better.
Yeah, I write. I think it depends on the market. I think when I know the market very well, I often just write free flow and then come back and edit it. I think when it's a market I'm not as familiar with, I rely on the mechanical process of reverse engineering each section and building it up, and so yeah, I think this is one of the strengths that you have then from my short chat with you, is that every single person that you coach has got a very different context and different skills and different starting point, and you can identify where they're coming from and where they're at and help them develop in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it should be. It wasn't that way in the beginning. I need to have enough experience to have some reference points and some comparison, some context. But that is how I approach it. I mean, right from the beginning, when somebody applies for my coaching, the first thing I do is give them a questionnaire, and it's a self-assessment, but I like to talk to them about who they think they are, because sometimes people know they know where they need to improve, and sometimes they have blind spots. Most of us have blind spots about something or other about ourselves. So, and sometimes these things don't come out. I mean, I work with people for a year, and I've had people stay on 5 years, 6 years sometimes, just because, I don't know, maybe it's good experience, but I assume at my fee level, they're getting good ROI too. And some of them have told me that, explicitly. I don't get into people's numbers globally unless they invite me in. I figure that's none of my business, but I'm glad to help them with, whatever is focused for them. Yeah, I do see each person as an individual. At this point, I mean, I was a little surprised you said that, because I can't see doing it any other way, but I didn't always do it that way. So of course there are other ways to do it, but yeah, it only makes sense to me. Well, I'm focused on getting the best results for my people, and the best results are more what they think the best results would be than what I think. But certainly if they want to get better financial results, sometimes that's a multi-part process.
Well, I think the reason that I noticed it, because we're talking about all these different applications that you've given different people, is that when you ask many copy coaches, particularly newer coaches, and they're on their own journey. They haven't got mature products yet. They're developing their skills still as well, and they're building up that momentum. A lot of it is still cookie cutter for them. A lot of it is templatized to the point where it's the same prescription. And whether that's because they want to scale the business and get themselves out of the operation, or whether it's just because that's all that they're familiar with, I understand that perspective. But I've always found that form of coaching has limits, to the point where I've had many clients will come to me. They want to close more. They want to close and generate more business. I'll recommend this copywriter does referral, more referral work, because they're good at relationship building, and this person is very good on camera. So I'll say, well, use your camera presence to differentiate. So it's like everybody gets a better result if they just lean into their strengths, So yeah, so I want to know how you got into coaching after working with, being in 100 different industries. I mean, after that many industries, I think many copywriters think that people become coaches just because they will make more money than writing copy. But when you've written in 100 niches, I don't think it wasn't just money motivation.
No. I could make a lot more money if I were writing copy, and
Yeah.
I do pretty well. But no. So I've always loved film, and I was always thinking about being a screenwriter. And I was at one point in my learning, still pretty much as a copywriter. Might have coached one person, but it wasn't really even in copy at this point. And I was in a class, again, in Marin County, just north of where I live. And I was a real wise guy. I'd say, well, that reminds me from the tawdry world of copywriting. And I did that a few times, and the teacher would sneer at me and then say, yes, David. a couple of the students from the class afterwards came out to me and said, "What is this copywriting thing?" Now, these were professional writers. One was a published novelist and one was a working journalist. And so I said, "Yeah," I told them what copywriting was. "Would you teach it to us?" And I thought, and I'd been wanting to do a product. So I said, "Yeah, I'll do that if you'll let me record it and sell the recording." And they said, "Well, sure, yeah." So
Nice.
I started to find I was a good copywriter. I am a good copywriter. There are a few dozen people in the world who are much better than me, and, dozens I'm at, maybe the 90% level I'm as good as. But I just, I was very lucky, and I'm not sure it was good luck necessarily. I wrote a sales letter very early on in my career that ended up making $40 million for my client, small business. And, pardon me, and I was never able to come close to that. I mean, I had some letters that pulled in $1 million. I had a lot of six-figure sales. But when, people started asking me to teach them or to coach them, that really lit me up. I really felt I could do that well. And I really took to it. And, as much as I spent time learning copywriting, I've spent a lot of time learning coaching and things to bring into the coaching. I kind of learned it along the way. Like I had a client who was an NLP trainer, a hypnosis trainer. So I found a lot of things from that helped with the coaching process. And, I took that graduate year-long. It was an academic program. It was, it was accredited in coaching and got a certificate for that. So I felt like I could do better as a coach than I could as a copywriter. That was the main reason. And, people started to get extraordinary results. Chris Haddad was a good copywriter, went off, founded a multi-million-dollar business. I can't take all the credit for that. He wouldn't give me all the credit for that, but he says I was the best, mentor and coach he had, and it really made a difference for him. I just think it's sort of in my nature to do this. I'm not quite sure why, though.
Yeah, when somebody's face lights up, then you kind of know that's the path, So
Yeah.
I had a similar experience with coaching because for the first 3 years of being a coach, I didn't make more money than freelancing. I was making good multi-six figures as a freelance copywriter. I had a great life traveling the world, just writing emails and writing landing pages and Facebook ads. So I really enjoyed it. But I enjoyed, copywriters messaging me saying, "Oh, I just closed this client," and I just closed this dream client. Like last year, somebody closed. One of the people I was coaching. I'm still coaching him, but he joined us, and within a month, he closed his dream client, like the guy he'd been following on social media for years. He joined. In this case, the catch is that I knew somebody that worked with that business. So I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that you love so-and-so. Let me actually make an introduction for you." So I made an intro, and then he ended up working with that business, and he still works with them today. But he was so happy. And to me, that personally, I get so much excitement seeing them living the life that they wanted to, because, copywriters, I don't think that most copywriters that stick with it just because of the money. I think there's an element of love for communication and creativity. And I think a lot of writers that come into our industry, they were previously writers. They wrote, they want to become a fiction writer one day, or, I actually loved the idea of film as well. But when I got started, I liked films. I didn't know how I would ever get into it, but I thought, this is, and I love movies. I love story. I'm a story junkie. Like a good story is all I need for a good day, So I think that was part of it for me too. And I really think that that's necessary, because I find a lot of coaches that come into this industry just to build the business. That's great, However, I think the transformation is difficult, because that transfer is that there's also an energy transfer. Like when I listen and learn from Matt Fury, when I listen to his audio tapes, I don't think that what he said is what transformed my writing. I think just the way I felt his energy transfer, and that the way he spoke the copy to me, the way he presented email marketing to me, that's why I love email more than anything else. It's not because email is the easiest copy or the most money. I love email because my first experience with email, real experience with email, was listening to Matt Fury's seminars, recordings, and it just like clicked for me. It was just passion. I just loved it. He made me laugh so many times. I just loved email ever since then. I had such a great experience with it, So yeah, this makes sense to me. Yeah. And that's pretty cool that you actually were able to generate 40 million for you said this is a small business. So that must have been quite significant for them. They must have been very happy.
Oh, they were thrilled. And they shared all of their appreciation verbally. I did not get any royalties on that. But yeah, that was good. You mentioned story, and that's kind of a through line in my life. I've been studying story for like 40 years, I think. And I started out studying playwriting, and then, improv, and then screenwriting. And I was my copywriting career and my coaching career were developing at the same time, and I noticed the stories that I'm learning about that I love to watch on TV and in the theater, and read in books. They're not the same stories we use in copy, and nobody's really made the distinction of what's the difference. And so I actually spoke at a conference about 20 years ago in Palm Springs. It was called StoryCon, and it was it was mostly academics talking about something called narratology, and people from Hollywood, screenwriters and writing coaches. But I talked about stories in copy and commercial stories, and I've been thinking about that difference for 20 years. I mean, a lot, and I've given other presentations about it. I did one at John Benson's Malibu Mastermind. But a couple of years ago, I sat down and wrote a book about it. I'll show you the book. Called The Persuasion Story Code. And what I realized is, a lot of people are saying that the hero's journey is the right story to use in copy. And, it's true. Chris Haddad is kind of the master of that in some of his earlier VSLs, where he has these gripping, emotional roller coaster stories. But most people can't do that. And that doesn't work for everybody in every situation. Okay, like let's take an example. I loved your story about your client that you referred to as Dream Client. That was a story. That was a persuasion story. I mean, if I want to know why, one of the reasons why Matt's a good guy to get coaching from, he's going to open up his network to me when he feels it's appropriate. And look what he's done for one of his clients. Right? And there are lots of stories like that just haven't been identified. So I sat down and really thought about it and put together, you could call it a taxonomy. It was a way of identifying and organizing different types of persuasion stories that we're already using, that have already been used successfully in copy.
That's big.
That's big. And that's in my book, The Persuasion Story Code.
I like that. I'm definitely going to read it now. I love stories. Yeah. We should add it to the description of this video too. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, a lot of people think you use stories to sell, and I think you use stories. You can have some stories that would close the sale, but I think most stories do something else. I think they build trust. I think they build credibility, and I think they do it in a way that nothing else can.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, that's clearly a necessary part of the sales process to build trust, not necessarily with the story, but works better when you do use a story. And, credibility you can do with a good origin story. I have 4 different types of those. Even Joe Carbo's letter, I use in there as an example of an origin story because it's so powerful. Is one type. So, yeah, stories are really important, and I think again they're different in copy than they are in drama, in film, in fiction.
All the best copy that I've written that's made the most money for all my clients, every single one of them had a story in it. So I've looked at my own copy that way. I look at my best email. One of my best emails for an upsell sequence for a BizOp coach involved a story about a guy that had to go to a mastermind and he couldn't afford it and he was nervous and he had all the excuses and all the reasons he couldn't go, but he knew that he needed to be there because of the opportunities that would be there. And so he took that jump and he made that decision. And that was one of the decisions that made him successful. And, now you might be in a similar situation thinking about whether or not this is the right next step for you. It's a really nice transition. It was a great
That's
story.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun email. I think the other thing about story that I personally love is because I love stories, I constantly find when I write copy that I'm actually having fun. I get paid to have fun. And writing story is one of the best ways to sell. It gives the client the most money, but it's also very, very entertaining. I'll find myself writing a story and I don't know about you, David, but I'm always laughing when I write copy. I'm constantly sitting there laughing. I'm like, oh man, this story is so well. I love it. I'm sitting there laughing, and I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be this reader is gonna be reading this story and be thinking this and that and feeling this experience and that experience I'm transferring to them. Yeah. So yeah, I'm 100% on board with. I think story actually would probably be the best. I would say it's probably the best way for somebody right now to improve a copy, because I think most copywriters, even experienced copywriters, they know that they can improve its story. They know, they're like, okay, I definitely have to improve at that. I can improve on leads, I can improve on my close, I can improve on bullets, but my story skills, they're lacking. And beginners, I think if beginners improve at stories, that also helps them to get out of this sort of tactical stitching everything together, because when you stitch everything together, it doesn't flow as nicely a lot of the time, especially if you just use templates. When you use story, I've written stories that weave the lead in, weave the credibility in, weave the problems in, weave the belief that they need to experience all into one. It just becomes one long story piece, but it's actually covered the entire first half of the sales letter in a story. That's the power. Then you suddenly transcend all these tactics. So yeah,
that's right. And there's also a scientific side to this, a neuroscience side. There's all kinds of studies that Harvard did a study, oxytocin increases, which increases trust and feeling of connection just when you're reading a story. And if the story is about a person, it increases even more. And there are many other examples like that. There's a great book called Wired for Story by Lisa Krohn that shows how our brains are literally set up to prefer stories to any other kind of communication. Yeah.
What's your origin story for how you got into copywriting?
Okay. Well, I was a journalist, and I had this problem. the better I got, the worse I felt. And I ended up with a dream job. I thought, oh, just moving to San Francisco will solve all of it. And I was the San Francisco bureau chief for McGraw-Hill's World News Service. And it just wasn't clicking. It wasn't working. I was really unhappy. So I don't know why I thought I could make this work, but I just quit. People thought I was nuts. They thought I needed, psychiatric care. I mean, they didn't try and have me committed, but they suggested that maybe I should be. And I tried a lot of things, ended up, ghostwriting a book. By 1991, which was like 6 years into this, I was broke. I was maxed out my credit cards, and the IRS had frozen my account. The tax authority had frozen my bank account. And I wasn't just sitting around all day, staring out the window. I had a business. It just wasn't profitable. I just wasn't making enough money. I had a partner, and he got this letter from a friend, from Gary Halbert, and my partner is pretty smart. He said, take a look at this. This might be you. This isn't for me. And that was the letter I was telling you about. That,
Wow.
yeah, I read it, and I just couldn't believe it. I read it 20 times. Like, what is this guy doing? How is he doing it? Why do I keep reading this, And I started learning everything I could. I had a copy of something called Your Marketing Genius at Work that Jay Abraham had put out. A friend lent his to me. And started writing copy without having any idea what I was doing. But I just did it. And then I think it was 1 or 2 years later, Hurricane Andrew, terribly devastating hurricane, hit Florida, and Gary lived in Key West at the time. And so he said, I'm going to throw a seminar, and it's free. And at the end, you're going to write a check for how much you think it was worth, not to me, but to the Red Cross for Hurricane Andrew. And I said, can't beat that. So I went there. That was a fateful event. I met Gary. I met John Carlton. I met Dan Kennedy. I met Ted Nicholas. I met Carl Galletti. And whoever else I met that I'm not mentioning your name right now, I apologize. That's all I can remember in this high pressure moment on Matthew's podcast. No, seriously, it was really great. And yeah, so I just kept working at it. And I noticed that some of the copywriters I followed, they had products. That was probably why I followed them. That's how I followed them. And I thought, well, I ought to have one. And then, fast forward to 1998 or 99, the two students from the screenwriting class asked me to teach them copywriting, and like that.
Yeah. How was that, being around the greatest copywriters in the world back then, when you said it was just 2 or 3 years into your
I didn't
career
really
learning
know.
copy?
I mean, there wasn't
It's great.
there wasn't a general consciousness of it. Oh, David Deutsch was the other one I forgot. I met him.
Oh,
He's
David.
been a big help and influence right from that time. I bought his book, and he gave me a little coaching initially. We become friends and done a lot of stuff together.
David's a great guy.
But I didn't know. There was no... See, these days, it's like copywriting, entrepreneurial copywriting is sort of consolidated to an industry and an ecosystem with a pecking order, and, it's heroes and villains and all that. At the time, copywriting, no one knew what we were. I would say I was a copywriter, and they said, oh, are you an attorney? Do you get copyrights for people? They had no idea what a copywriter was. And in the advertising world, we were considered the black sheep. You know, we were the ones they didn't want to talk about because we did junk mail. And I don't know if you have any idea what that is, but back in the day, that was the lower end of direct mail. And then we did infomercials. And of course, the funny thing about, see, all of the brand advertising, you can tell it's advertising right away because it says, look at me, I'm so clever, I'm so funny, I'm so free, look at me, you know. And direct response advertising, the bad stuff says sleaze, scum, hype. But the good stuff, you don't even notice it. It's just someone giving you good information. You know, you ask someone who bought something from Amazon about, you know, copywriting, that was copywriting. They say, oh, no, that was just information about the product, right?
Right, yeah.
They read the reviews. Oh, no, those just were reviews from other users. Testimonial, right? I mean, so good copywriting, it's not exactly invisible, but it's not identifiable as copywriting. It's identifiable as communication that people want to read.
It's interesting.
With information.
I was also...
I'm sorry. Yeah?
No, I was just going to say that when I first started, people thought it was a paralegal. You know, oh, you're a copywriter. Oh, so you do copyrights. I'm like, no, it's writing. It's you know, so yeah. Nowadays, everybody knows what a copywriter is. I was in the Philippines recently, and I said I'm a copywriter, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. You do marketing." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So everybody now knows from every country about copywriting. So
it's true, and I think the internet, especially social media, has had a lot to do with that. Although I would say a lot of them really don't know what they think they know what copywriting is, or they know what the popular. I guess that's true of anything. The popular conception of what it is and what it really is are usually two different things anyway.
I think it's a great opportunity because for us now, there's so much, I mean, even just with our conversation about how few people, you know, they don't really look at the old copy anymore. You know, they don't really look at the copy that wasn't on social media. A lot of them are just using these very tactical. Yeah, I find a lot of this funnel hacking. I think a lot of copywriters today just funnel hack. You know, you have one guy that's created a really great funnel and everybody just kind of swipes that funnel and they all just kind of rewrite that. And then when you use AI with that, AI just takes the same thing and duplicates it. And then everybody uses that for a while. And then another person creates a funnel and everybody funnel hacks that funnel and the same sort of process. I find good copywriters that I learn from, they'll have an idea, like let's say, you know, lazy man's way to riches sort of idea. They'll actually bring that idea into a new promotion that's so different and so fresh, and it just feels so good. And that's the thing everybody swipes, but it's that guy that creates that control promotion. I can tell that person knows the fundamentals and knows the core of copywriting, and I'm like, okay, that's why there's controls. Like I had an idea like that actually. So I took an idea in the biz op space. You know, we had an Instagram account that I was working on. I was consulting them on some Instagram ideas. And I said, everybody in this niche, it was like 2-3 years ago, everybody in this niche is always talking about how easy it is to make money on YouTube and how big YouTube is and blah, blah, blah. But what if we took a different angle? What if we said that this random person is making more money talking about frogs than somebody that goes to a 9-to-5 to work all day? They kind of play into that lazy idea. So I was like, well, you know, while most people go to work, this 18-year-old is making money posting frog videos, making 10K a month. David, I'm telling you, this idea is still being used in the Instagram trend because people are not going to the fundamentals. I wouldn't even say it's my own idea. I just took the lazy man idea and gave it a spin and put it into Instagram. And now we got all these guys kind of, you know, copying and, you know, they don't come up with original ideas.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what you call that particular kind of creative thinking. I mean, you could say it's lateral thinking, but it's certainly more than that. It's basically operating from the point of view of understanding the principle and reapplying the principle in a fundamentally different format. Same principle, different format, totally unrecognizable to someone who doesn't understand the principle and the process of doing that.
Yeah, well, now we have a lot of people. So that idea at first was the frog, and now everybody's starting to use like the Kardashians and Trump and Elon Musk, and now they just say, Elon Musk had this thing that happened recently, and here's these 10 people that are profiting by posting videos on YouTube. So they took the original idea, they kind of added a little bit of a spin to it, and now they just recycle the same thing. But the original idea was good, not because of the celebrity, but because of the frog aspect of it. Because it's like, how could somebody be making money online talking about frogs? And
Right.
I think that, right. So it's not, like they missed the principle behind it. Is there's this element of curiosity that creates a contrast. There's a comparison that's different. I think with Elon Musk, it's a bit more sensational. So I think people kind of lose interest in that idea. It's like, oh, you're making money from Elon Musk. Okay, I've heard that before. But somebody making money from posting about frogs, really, what am I doing with my life if there's this random person doing that? So yeah, but I think just, back to what we were talking about is just that I think many copywriters these days are not going back to those fundamentals. And that's why it's such a great opportunity, because there's just not enough education on it. So it's great that, you're educating copywriters on this. And I know David Deutsch also does a lot of coaching on this, and many of the great copywriters are, educating copywriters on it. But it's not as sexy, it's not as sexy when we talk about, I think a lot of the ideas we talked about today, I don't think that the video blows up from a lot of the content, because it's like, it's not, here's how to make 10K a month, here's how to make $30,000 a month with AI. That's what the YouTube algorithm will love that video, but that's not really what creates the result. So if you're watching this all the way until now and you're a copywriter and you see that, hey, this video's got like a lot less sort of traction, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe that's why there's such an opportunity for you, because there's actually very few people applying this stuff. So
it's true. Last week I was talking to Nick O'Connor. I don't know if you know him. He's done something with a big financial publisher. Him and Glenn Fisher are doing something with MarketWise, and they're actually training 12 financial copywriter applicants, wannabes, students for free as part of a contest and so forth. And, we were talking about this, and you must hear this too. People at the highest level say, I can't find a good copywriter. There are all these people who say they're copywriters and have their own theories and their own pronouncements. And when it comes time to actually perform and get the job done and write the copy that closes the sales and keeps the customers, they can't do it. And at the end of the day, that's the sexy part, right? The sexy part is being able to get to the end of the week without worrying about 10 bills you're going to have to pay on Monday the next week,
Yeah, this is the gap constantly. These days it's content. These days that's sort of the perspective I keep trying to shift with copywriters. I say, you're not a copywriter if you just write content. That's not what copywriting is.
Yeah, and for many years people have been afraid to sell, been afraid to be criticized for selling, been afraid to feel guilty for asking other people for money. And these days they've come up with, very self-congratulatory rationalizations for that. But the reality is, if people don't sell, business doesn't keep going, the world stops spinning. So it has to happen. And if you can help do it and you can enjoy it and have fun with it and make some money with it, that's actually a good thing.
Well, I think businesses benefit when you can promote their product in a way that reflects the actual value of it. I think a lot of times, a lot of the copywriters that I've worked with will have a very aggressive claim on a sales letter or an email. And I'll say, you're actually not really reflecting the value of the product when you use it that way, because you might get a few customers that come in because they just want to get this and that and the other. But, your refund rate's going to go up. Your client expectations, like, when you hand that customer off to the actual business fulfillment, you're handing them a lot of problems that they don't actually need, but you don't see that side of the business sometimes as a copywriter. So it's like, let's change this claim. Let's actually be more honest, or more, let's just be more transparent with what the value really is. And actually people will buy more. And then they find out This people are buying more. My copy is more compliant, so it's scaling on Facebook ads because I'm not getting shut down. Customers have the right expectation going in. Refund rates are going down. Just overall, the business is doing better for it. And that's why I personally love copy so much. It's just because I see how much you actually change. You actually make businesses more valuable without having to dilute or like, you're using the truth. You're showing the product for what it really is in the very, very best way possible. It makes business better for everybody. So I kind of want us to go back there. That's sort of the vision, part of why I did the podcast, is because I want us to be at that point where it was when you talk about that event, how, everybody was just kind of, we're all just in this world together, figuring things out and helping businesses, instead of this sort of this guru hierarchical structure where there's these guys here and then there's these guys here and then these guys have to buy courses to get up there. I just think if we all just educated on how to write good copy, and the next generation knows how to write copy and they help businesses, those businesses benefit. Those businesses like copywriters. They pay more for copywriters. More copywriters get better. The whole industry just benefits. Everybody just benefits, So, yeah.
It sounds like a great idea. Anything I can do to contribute to that happening would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think people should start by getting your book. I think that would be a good starting point. So I'm going to leave it in the description. If it's on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm going to leave it in the description. And if people want to learn from you and get coaching from you and take their skills to the next level, how can they reach you and find you?
Yeah, the best thing to do is go to my website, garfinkelcoaching.com, GARFINKEL coaching, all one word, .com. Also, I have a podcast, which I hope you'll come on and can learn more about me by just listening.
I love that.
Flap my lips half an hour every week. And that's, when is that? It's copywriterspodcast.com, comes out every Monday on YouTube.
Amazing.
And on all the audio platforms.
David, thanks so much, man. Really, really appreciate this. This was a great chat. I learned a lot of things from you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right, chat soon.
Okay.